G'day viewers. So the second question about English longswords was basically the guards. Once I've got my sword, where do I hold it? So let's talk about the guards. Now, in the Lichtenau and Fiore traditions, of course, we have a whole bunch of positions of guards or posters, okay? Where it could be that, or that, or that, or that, or that, or that, and a whole bunch of these positions, and we're told that all our cuts, all our parries are described as transitions between these positions. Okay, that's a really, really cool and useful way of teaching people to do it. You can teach them, well, you go from there to there to there, and you've taught them how to cut, and then you say, and you do it back the other way, and you've taught them a parry. And it's a really, really useful teaching tool, and helps people move nice and accurately along the right lines between the right points. Great. When we get to, say, 18th century broadsword, we get the same thing in Britain, where we have, all right, that's an outside guard, that's an inside guard, the inside cut moves from the outside to the inside guard, the outside cut moves from the inside to the outside guard. Again, a really simple and useful way of teaching people the correct movements to the correct positions. What's interesting is that prior to the 18th century, the English didn't seem to do that at all. So Silva doesn't have a million different postures. He has fights, wards, and lyings. Now, a ward is a position where you ward a blow. A lying is a position where you wait for something to happen, wait for your opponent to attack, or wait for an opportunity to attack them, so it's where you lie. A fight is a collection of wards and or lyings that kind of go together and do the same sort of job. But not all lyings are wards, and not all wards are lyings, and that's where it becomes interesting. So, for example, open fight has one lying, which is this, but this, of course, is not a ward. I'm not warding anything from here, okay? This is just somewhere where I lie in order to attack or counterattack. True Gardent is both a lying and a ward. I can lie here and wait for an attack or an opportunity to attack, or I can ward a blow in this exact position. I can parry it and then riposte. But Garden Fight also has two wards that are not lyings, and that is Bastard Gardens down here. Okay? And so some wards are lying, some lyings are wards, but not all. Okay? If I'm in Staccato, this is a lying, but it's not a ward. In order to ward, I have to lift to a forehand ward on either side in order to protect myself. And these are, of course, collected into fights. Garden fight being all the point down stuff, open being all that. Close fight being when you're close enough that you want to extend and engage your opponent's sword at the half sword. And variable fight being everything else, but most specifically low wards down there and high wards up here. That is different to the European stuff. Some people see a parallel between Fiore's stable and unstable postures in Silva's collection of fights. Maybe there's something to that, I don't know. But it does seem to be a very different way of organising it. And Silva doesn't tell you that your downright blow must go from open ward to forehand ward on the left or anything like that. Okay, he just describes cuts, often targets, hit them on the head, hit them on the arm, hit them on the leg. The earlier English two-handed sword manuscripts does pretty much that, okay? It doesn't give us positions to hold the sword per se, it doesn't name guards, it just gives us the names of a whole bunch of cuts, hawks, rabbits, rakes, roundies. Now it does, of course, occasionally describe where the sword is as you are doing these things. So we're told to lift the sword up above your head, above your right shoulder, flat down by your back. Lay the sword softly on the ground in front of you. And various other positions, up by your left shoulder, ready to thrust, before your breast, ready to thrust. And so we have a whole bunch of positions that are instantly recognisable. Okay, they're places that one could easily hold a longsword. But there's barely a hint that any of these things even have names, okay? And really the only hints that we have along those lines are we're told once in The Man That Wol that one could abide upon a pendant, which would be a position like that, because the pendant or hanging guard is mentioned in Wilde's quarterstaff. There's also a technique in Nettle called casting the fool, which is a great way of hitting somebody who's in a fool's guard. So maybe they knew that was a fool's guard and they called it a fool's guard, but as far as the instructions are concerned, it's not important. What's important are the cuts. If you're going to be doing a hawk, you're going to be doing a hawk, and it doesn't matter if you're doing it from there, or there, or there, or here, or here. It's all the same cut regardless, and that seems to be the way the manuscripts are organised, which is different and strange. That said, for teaching purposes, it's really good to have guards with names. Okay, so what positions do we have? So we have open fight. We have right shoulder. We have high wards. We have the hanging guard or pendant. We have the equivalent of a fool's guard and a low ward, which can be done on either side, we're told. We have something equivalent to posta by corno up there. And we're also told to do an in-stop and an out-stop, which I can't believe is anything different to an inside and outside guard that you get in later backsword. In addition to this, of course, we know there's a very close relationship between the quarterstaff fight and the two-handed sword fight. Silver says so explicitly, as do other English sources of the period, and the Cotton Titus manuscript has the strokes of the two-handed sword and the strokes of the two-handed staff using exactly the same terminology for the same things. And we know what the useful positions to hold your quarterstaff in is. So primarily we have low ward, which would be something like this, and high ward, which would be something between those two, being the most useful. But of course a high ward with the staff goes all the way to the ground, so it covers a sort of fool's guard as well as a high guard. We have the aforementioned hanging or pendant guard, and we also have the medium guard with our point in our opponent, between our opponent's eyes, which would be the equivalent of a posta longa or long point. So we can use the quarterstaff wards as well as some of the stuff from the manuscripts to get a fairly full range of positions that you hold your sword in. All that said, the important thing, I think, is not to be too tied down about exactly where you're putting your sword, whether or not your right shoulder has got to be here or here or here. Well, it's going to vary depending on what you want to do with it. Silver's instructions on this are simply to remember that at the two-handed sword, that you lie in such sort upon your wards that you may both ward, strike and thrust both double and single, and then return to your former wards, slips and lyings, again as you were before. So he's really just saying, just as long as you can do what you need to do to ward, to cut, to thrust from wherever you're holding a sword, it's good. So the ones that I primarily use are right shoulder. I find this better and more productive than open. High ward on the left, fool's guard on the left, iron ward on the right, which is something mentioned by Swetnam. The pendant, which you do on a wide sun if you want to ever stay here for any time. Forehand or low ward, both right and left, and of course a low ward down here, which is good for thrusting, and your medium ward if you want to extend your sword at your opponent. That's really the suite of them. You notice that I'm kind of avoiding crossed hands positions on this side because they're a little bit awkward, and that's fairly common in the English staff system, is to avoid crossing hands if you can. And it does bring in an interesting point in that there's no mention of half swording in the English material, even though if you were used to swapping hands with your quarterstaff, as you come around this side, that would be a fairly obvious thing to do, especially if you've got a sword like this where that can be quite awkward, whereas that would be a very natural way of coming around and using a big sword like this effectively. But there's not really any mention of that at all. I'm sure they did it, they just not a big enough part of the system to get it into our little bit of instructions. Just like there's virtually no mention of grappling other than one line of fall upon his harness and get thou the grip. Of course they did grappling, but again, it wasn't an emphasized part of the system. So I hope that has answered the question about where you hold your sword wards. You hold your sword where you need to hold it in order to achieve what you want to achieve in any particular instance. And if that means you're going to do this, then you do that. Whatever it is that you want to do, you put your sword in the right place. What's important is that you can cut, thrust, and or ward from it, depending on what you need to do.